in the quiet edge of Prescott National Forest where wilderness meets civilization. Emily Parker's life took an unexpected turn when she brought home Max, a rescued bobcat, deemed unreleasable to the wild as a wildlife rehabilitation specialist. Emily understood the delicate balance between respecting wild nature and providing care. Her young daughter, Lily, shares their home not just with Emily but with Max the bobcat, whose wild instincts remain ever present beneath his gentle demeanor. But on one fateful afternoon, when Emily stepped away for just 60 seconds, everything changed. A strange sound from the backyard, a desperate call rushing back. Emily's heart pounded as she saw the yard wasn't as she left it. What happened in that brief moment would challenge everything Emily thought she knew about wild animals, maternal instinct, and the extraordinary depths of unexpected love. This is a story of boundaries, crossed, trust earned, and a sacrifice that would forever change the meaning of family. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard of the modest ranch house nestled at the edge of the Prescott National Forest in northern Arizona. Emily Parker stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dirt from beneath her fingernails after an afternoon spent tending to her vegetable garden. Through the window, she watched her 1-year-old daughter, Lily, sitting contentedly on a blanket in their fenced backyard, babbling to herself as she examined a colorful plastic toy nearby. Stretched lazily in a patch of dappled sunlight was Max, their most unusual family member. The young male bobcat's tawny spotted coat gleamed in the sunshine, his tufted ears occasionally twitching at distant sounds. Only he could hear. His presence in their home was the result of circumstances Emily could never have imagined. Just 6 months earlier, Emily hadn't planned on adopting a wild animal. She'd spent most of her adult life working as a wildlife rehabilitation specialist, dedicating herself to healing injured animals before returning them to their natural habitats. That was how she'd first encountered Max, a severely malnourished an injured bobcat kitten brought to the Southwest Wildlife Conservation Center, where she volunteered 3 days a week. He'd been found trapped in an illegal snare, his right front paw mangled and infected. The wildlife veterinarians had initially doubted he would survive, but Max had proven to be a fighter. After multiple surgeries, he had pulled through, though the damage to his paw meant he would never be able to hunt effectively in the wild. As a result, Max was deemed unreleasable, a permanent captive. Emily had developed a special bond with the young bobcat during his rehabilitation. Unlike most wild animals that maintained a healthy fear of humans, despite prolonged contact, Max had displayed an unusual temperament, cautious but not fearful, observant but not aggressive. When the center faced budget cuts and needed to find permanent placements for some of their educational animals, Emily had made the difficult decision to apply for the special wildlife rehabilitation permit that would allow her to give Max a permanent home. The permitting process had been rigorous, requiring home inspections, extensive documentation of Emily's experience with wild felines, and construction of a secure outdoor enclosure. But 3 months ago, Max had finally come home with her. The transition hadn't been without challenges, but he had adapted to his new environment with remarkable ease. What had surprised Emily most was Max's gentle curiosity around Lily. The bobcat gave the toddler a wide berth initially, but over weeks he'd grown more comfortable, sometimes watching her play from a distance of several feet. Emily never left them unsupervised, of course. Despite his good temperament, Max was still a wild animal, a predator with natural instincts that could never be fully domesticated. Emily reached for a dish towel to dry her hands, glancing once more at the peaceful backyard scene. She needed to grab the laundry from the dryer in the adjacent utility room, a task that would take less than a minute. Lily was happily occupied and Max was dozing in the sun, his typical afternoon routine. It will be fine, she told herself. Just 60 seconds, Emily murmured, turning away from the window. She walked briskly to the utility room, pulling the warm, clean clothes from the dryer and folding them into the waiting basket. Her thoughts drifted to dinner preparations and the upcoming weekend visit from her mother. The ordinary rhythms of life had a way of normalizing even the most unusual circumstances, like sharing a home with a bobcat. A strange noise from the backyard interrupted her thoughts, a low guttural sound she recognized as Max's warning call. Emily's heart quickened as she dropped the shirt she'd been folding and rushed back toward the kitchen. Through the window, she could no longer see Lily on her blanket. Panic surged through her body as she burst through the back door, eyes frantically searching the yard. What she saw stopped her breath entirely. Max had Lily by the back of her overalls, dragging her rapidly across the yard toward the house. The bobcat's movements were urgent but careful, his powerful jaws holding the fabric firmly without touching Lily's skin. The toddler wasn't crying. She seemed more surprised than frightened, her little hands grabbing at the grass as she was pulled along. Max, no exclamation mark, Emily screamed, rushing toward them. The bobcat released Lily and swayed on his feet, turning to face something at the edge of the blanket where Lily had been sitting. That's when Emily saw it, a rattlesnake, coiled and ready to strike again. Its distinctive rattling sound now registering in her consciousness. Max collapsed onto his side, his breathing labored, a small trickle of blood matted the fur on his front leg. In that moment, Emily understood with crystal clarity what had happened. The snake must have approached where Lily was playing. Max had seen the danger and moved Lily away from it, getting bitten. In the process, the realization sent a cold wave of fear through Emily's body, followed immediately by the hot rush of adrenaline. She scooped up Lily, who had started to cry, quickly checking her for any signs of injury. Finding none, Emily placed her in the portable play pen on the covered porch, well away from the snake. Then, grabbing a long-handled garden hoe that leaned against the house, she carefully approached the rattlesnake, which remained poised defensively near Lily's blanket. Emily had dealt with rattlesnakes before. Living at the forest's edge made such encounters inevitable. With practiced movements, she used the hoe to guide the snake into a large plastic storage bin she kept specifically for this purpose. Securing the lid with trembling hands, she would release it far from the house later, but right now Max needed immediate attention. The bobcat lay where he had fallen, his golden eyes glazed with pain, his breathing rapid and shallow. The bite was on his front leg, where the fur was already beginning to swell around 2 distinct puncture marks. Emily knew that time was critical. With venomous snake bites, even for a robust wild animal like Max. Dr. Harris at the wildlife clinic was 40 minutes away. Emily grabbed her phone from her pocket and dialed his number as she ran to the garage for a large pet carrier. Emily, Dr. Harris answered on the second ring. What's up? Max has been bitten by a rattlesnake, Emily explained, her voice tight with urgency. He was protecting Lily. I'm bringing him in right now. I'll prepare the anti-venom. And Dr. Harris replied without hesitation, try to keep him calm and limit his movement. The more he moves, the faster the venom spreads. Emily ended the call and returned to Max's side with the carrier. The bobcat weighed nearly 30 pounds, not enormous by wild bobcat standards, but still a challenge to move safely, especially in his current condition. She spread a blanket beside him and gently rolled him onto it, using it as a makeshift stretcher to slide him into. The carrier. Max offered no resistance, a worrying sign. In the 6 months she'd known him, he'd never been this docile even during his most severe illness at the rehabilitation center. He'd maintained a wild animal's natural weariness. Now, he simply watched her with pain. Dulled eyes after securing Max in the carrier. Emily retrieved Lily from the playpen and quickly strapped her into her car seat in the back of the SUV. The carrier with Max went on the passenger seat where Emily could keep an eye on him during the drive. "Hang on, Max," she whispered as she backed out of the driveway. "Just hang on." The drive to the wildlife clinic passed in a blur of worry. Emily divided her attention between the road, the rear view mirror where she could see Lily chewing contentedly on a teething toy, in the carrier beside her where Max's breathing grew increasingly labored. The relationship between Emily and Max had always been complicated. She respected his wild nature and never harbored illusions that he was a pet, yet their connection transcended the usual boundaries between humans and wild animals. She had nursed him back from the brink of death, and now, incredibly, he had put himself in harm's way to protect her. "Daughter, why did you do that, you silly cat?" she murmured, tears pricking at her eyes. "That's not how this is supposed to work." The wildlife clinic came into view, a low, practical building set back from a main road. Dr. Harris was waiting outside as Emily pulled up a gurney, ready to transport Max. "Inside, he's deteriorating," Emily said as she opened the passenger door. "The bite is on his right front leg, and there's significant swelling." Dr. Harris nodded, helping her transfer the carrier to the gurney. "Let's get him inside." Rattlesnake venom is primarily hemotoxic. It affects the blood and tissues. The good news is that we have plenty of antivenom on hand. Emily followed with Lily in her arms, the toddler unusually quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. Inside the examination room, Dr. Harris and his assistant worked quickly to assess Max's condition, administering fluids and carefully injecting antivenom near the bite site. "The next 12 hours will be critical," Dr. Harris explained. "Adjusting and for drip, we'll need to monitor him closely for signs of anaphylaxis or other adverse reactions to the antivenom. I'd like to keep him overnight at minimum." Emily nodded, bouncing Lily gently on her hip. "Of course, whatever he needs." Dr. Harris glanced at Lily, then back at Emily, his expression thoughtful. "You said he was bitten while protecting your daughter." "Yes." Emily recounted the scene she had witnessed, Max dragging Lily away from a snake, then collapsing after apparently being bitten. "Remarkable," Dr. Harris mused. "Protective behavior toward humans, especially children, isn't unheard of in domesticated animals like dogs, but it's highly unusual in a wild species like a bobcat, even one that's been habituated to humans." He checked Max's vital signs. "Again, animals constantly surprise us with their complexity, don't they?" Emily looked down at Max's unconscious form, remembering the urgency in his movements as he pulled Lily to safety. "They certainly do." After ensuring that Max was stable, Emily reluctantly prepared to leave. She needed to get Lily home for dinner and bedtime, and there was nothing more she could do at the clinic. Dr. Harris promised to call with updates throughout the night. The house felt strangely empty without Max's presence as Emily went through the motions of the evening routine, feeding Lily, giving her a bath, reading her a bedtime story. Her thoughts continually returned to the Bobcat fighting for his life at the clinic. She checked her phone, obsessively waiting for news. Dr. Harris called shortly after 9 o'clock. He's responding well to the antivenom. He reported his vitals have stabilized and the swelling hasn't increased in the past 2 hours. "I'm cautiously optimistic." Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That's wonderful news. He's not out of the woods yet," Dr. Harris cautioned, "but if he continues improving overnight, you might be able to bring him home tomorrow afternoon." After hanging up, Emily walked out to the back porch and stared into the darkness of the yard. The empty patch of grass where Max usually lounged, seemed to emphasize his absence. How quickly the wild bobcat had become an integral part of their lives, and not merely as an exotic presence, but as a guardian who had proven himself more devoted than anyone could have expected. Emily slept fitfully that night, waking frequently to check on Lily and to see if there were any messages from Dr. Harris. By morning, the updates continued to be positive. Max was awake, the swelling had begun to subside, and his blood work showed improving kidney function, a crucial indicator that his body was processing the venom without permanent damage. By early afternoon, Emily received the call she'd been waiting for. Max was ready to come home. She arranged for her neighbor, Mrs. Thornton, to watch Lily while she made the trip to the clinic. Dr. Harris met her in the examination room, where Max lay in a large kennel looking tired but alert. His right front leg was bandaged, and an IV catheter remained taped in place. "He's made a remarkable recovery," Dr. Harris said, opening the kennel door to check the bandage. "I've removed the IV since he's drinking well on his own now. The tissue damage around the bite will continue to heal over the next week or so, and I've prescribed oral antibiotics to prevent secondary infection." He handed Emily a bottle of pills. "These need to be given twice daily with food." Emily laughed softly. "Easier said than done with a bobcat." Dr. Harris smiled. "I have faith in your abilities. You've accomplished more challenging feats of wildlife rehabilitation." Together, they transferred Max to Emily's carrier for the journey home. The bobcat was subdued but watchful, his natural weariness returning as his strength improved. During the drive home, Emily found herself talking to Max, something she rarely did despite their close relationship. She had always maintained professional boundaries with the wild animals in her care, avoiding excessive anthropomorphism. You've completely upended my understanding of wild animal behavior," she told him, glancing at the carrier. "What you did for Lily, that's not something that fits neatly into any wildlife management textbook I've ever read." Max shifted in the carrier, his eyes fixed on her. Emily had no illusions that he understood her words, but there was an unmistakable intelligence in his gaze that had always set him apart from other wild animals she had rehabilitated. When they arrived home, Mrs. Thornton greeted them at the door with Lily in her arms. The elderly woman had been initially skeptical about Emily's unusual house guest, but had gradually accepted Max's presence. "How's our hero doing?" she asked, peering at the carrier. "On the mend," Emily replied, setting the carrier down in the living room. "Thank you for watching, Lily." "My pleasure, dear. That's quite an extraordinary animal you've got there." Mrs. Thornton handed Lily over to Emily. Not many creatures would put themselves in harm's way for a human child. After Mrs. Thornton left, Emily opened the carrier door and stepped back, giving Max space to emerge at his own pace. The bobcat remained inside for several minutes, assessing his surroundings before cautiously stepping out, favoring his injured leg. Lily, who had been watching from Emily's arms, let out a delighted squeal and pointed Max. Max! It was the first time she had clearly said his name, and Emily felt a rush of emotion. "That's right, sweetie, Max is home." She set Lily down in her playpen, and the toddler immediately pulled herself up to standing, babbling excitedly at the bobcat. Max approached slowly, sniffing the air, then settled on the floor a few feet from the playpen, his golden eyes fixed on Lily. Emily watched the silent exchange between child and wildcat, marveling at the improbable bond that had formed. There was no scientific explanation for why Max had risked his life to protect Lily from the rattlesnake. Wild animals acted primarily from instinct, not the complex emotional reasoning that might drive a human or domestic dog to perform a heroic act. Yet there was no denying what had happened. Perhaps there were aspects of animal consciousness that remained beyond human understanding depths of connection that transcended conventional explanations. The following days established a new routine. Max spent most of his time resting indoors as he recovered initially. Reluctant to put weight on his injured leg, Emily administered his antibiotics, hidden in pieces of chicken, which the Bobcat accepted with minimal suspicion. A week after the incident, Emily sat on the back porch watching Lily play in a shallow kiddie pool while Max lounged nearby, his bandage now removed to reveal pink healing skin. With a snake bite had been the sound of a car in the driveway announced the arrival of her mother Margaret, who had driven up from Phoenix for her monthly visit. Margaret emerged from her carrying a shopping bag and wearing an expression of trepidation that Emily recognized all too while her mother had never fully approved of Max's presence in the household, viewing it as an unnecessary risk. Despite Emily's professional qualifications. "Hello, dear," Margaret called, approaching cautiously, her eyes fixed on Max. "How is everyone doing?" Emily rose to greet her mother with a hug. "We're all well. Max is recovering nicely from his snake bite." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Snake bite? What happened?" As they settled on the porch with iced tea, Emily recounted the events of the previous week, the rattlesnake's appearance, Max's intervention, and his subsequent recovery. Margaret listened with increasing astonishment. "So he actually dragged Lily away from the snake?" she asked, glancing at Max with new consideration. "And got bitten protecting her?" "Yes," Emily confirmed. "Dr. Harris said it's extremely unusual behavior for a wild animal, even one that's been rehabilitated." Margaret was silent for a long moment, watching as Lily splashed in her pool under Emily's watchful eye. Max remained in his spot, seemingly dozing, but with one eye occasionally opening to track the toddler's movements. "I've been wrong about him," Margaret finally admitted. "I was so certain that keeping a wild predator around Lily was irresponsible." But she shook her head. "I never considered he might actually protect her." Emily smiled, knowing how difficult it was for her mother to reconsider a firmly held position. "He's unique, Mom. I've worked with hundreds of wild animals and I've never encountered one quite like Max. He maintains his wild nature in most ways, but there's something different about how he relates to us, to Lily, especially later that evening after Lily had been put to bed. Emily and her mother sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Max had taken up his usual position at the edge of the yard, his silhouette distinct against the darkening landscape. "You know," Margaret said thoughtfully, "my grandfather used to tell stories about the old ranchers in this area who believed bobcats were special creatures, not quite of this world. They said bobcats could see things humans couldn't, sense dangers before they appeared." Emily smiled. "That sounds like folklore." "Of course it is," Margaret agreed. "But all folklore has its roots in observation. People noticed something unusual about these animals and created stories to explain it." She nodded toward Max. "Maybe there was more truth to those old tales than we modern scientific mind want to admit." As if aware he was being discussed, Max turned to look at them, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. In the months that followed, life settled into a new pattern. Max recovered fully from his snake bite, the only reminder a small patch of fur that grew back slightly lighter than the surrounding coat. Emily installed additional snake barriers around the property and remained vigilant during outdoor playtime with Lily. Word of Max's heroic act spread through the local wildlife rehabilitation community, with Dr. Harris even documenting the case for a journal on animal behavior. Researchers from the nearby university expressed interest in observing Max, hoping to better understand the complex cognition that might have driven his protective behavior. Emily permitted limited observation sessions, but remained protective of Max's space and routine. She had no desire to see him treated as a research subject rather than the multi-faceted being she had come to No, on warm evenings, Emily often sat on the porch watching Lily toddle around the yard under her close supervision, with Max maintaining his characteristic watchful presence nearby. The Bobcat never sought affection in the way of domestic pets. He didn't come when called or enjoy being touched, yet his consistent presence had become a comfort, a wild spirit who had chosen in his own way to be part of their family. Sometimes I wonder if you understand more than you let on, Emily told him one evening as Lily played with blocks on a blanket nearby. What goes on in that wild mind of yours? Max the Bobcat blinked slowly at her, his expression as inscrutable as ever, yet somehow conveying a depth that Emily had never sensed in other wild animals. There would always be an unbridgeable gap between human understanding and wild animal consciousness, Emily knew, yet in those golden eyes she sometimes caught glimpses of something profound, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between species. She would never fully comprehend why Max had risked his life to save Lily that day. Perhaps it was some complex territorial instinct, or perhaps something deeper that humans lacked the framework to understand. What mattered was the reality of what had happened. A wild creature had chosen to protect a human child, forming a bond that defied conventional explanation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deepening shades of indigo, Emily watched Max rise and stretch, then move to a spot closer to Lily's blanket. The toddler looked up and smiled at him, utterly unafraid of the wild predator that most children would rightly fear. Max, Lily said clearly, offering him a block. The Bobcat made no move to take it, of course, but sat watching with that peculiar intensity that seemed reserved only for Lily. In that moment of connection between wild animal and human child, Emily glimpsed something rare and precious, a harmony that most humans spent their lives searching for, but rarely found. She had always believed her work in wildlife rehabilitation was about helping animals return to their natural place in the wild. Now, with Max, she was discovering that sometimes nature created its own unexpected connections, bridging worlds that seemed impossibly separate. In his own wild way, Max had found his place not in the forests where he had been born, but here with him, part of a family that defied definition but was no less real for its uniqueness. As darkness settled over the Arizona landscape, Emily gathered Lily in her arms and headed toward the house, Max following at his customary distance. Different species, different worlds, yet bound together by an extraordinary moment of sacrifice that had changed all their lives forever. Behind them, the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, watching over the unusual family, a mother, a child, and a wild guardian who had crossed the ancient boundary between human and wilderness to save a life he had somehow come to cherish.